December 25th, 2024, Christmas Day. An Embraer 190 from Azerbaijan Airlines crashes in flames in Kazakhstan. 67 people on board, 38 dead, including both pilots. Flight 8,243 had departed from Baku bound for Grozny in Russian Chechnya. But something went terribly wrong while passing through Russian airspace. Shrapnel pierced the fuselage. The hydraulic system failed, and instead of landing at nearby Russian airports, it was forced to cross the Caspian Sea to Kazakhstan. Russia said it was an accident, that it was Ukrainian drones or maybe bad weather. Putin even apologized for the tragic incident, but never admitted fault. 7 months after the accident, the president of Azerbaijan broke the silence and made a statement that would end any chance of diplomacy.
The idea that it was a Ukrainian drone that possibly hit the plane is absolutely ridiculous. There were 2 attacks on the plane. So you can imagine a Ukrainian drone comes, targets the Azeri plane, hits it, then crashes, and then once again. So that's a story for kindergarten. We know what happened. Besides, Russian airspace wasn't closed. Several minutes after the plane was hit. And that's also the responsibility of those who didn't announce it. So all of this is as clear as today's sky.
And this statement is not just about a plane. It's about the end of an alliance that lasted for decades and the beginning of something that Putin never expected. A former ally who is no longer afraid to call him a liar in front of the whole world. But there's something even more worrying for Putin in this whole story. While Azerbaijan was moving away from Russia, it was getting closer to another country that Putin considers his existential enemy, Ukraine. What started as an air tragedy at Christmas could turn into an alliance that will completely change the balance of power in the region. And Russia? Well, they know that. So much so that they started publicly accusing Azerbaijan of something unthinkable, actively helping Ukraine in military operations against Russian territory. To understand how we got into this situation, we need to go back to that Christmas day and examine every detail of what really happened. Because the evidence shows a story quite different from the official Russian version. Flight 8,243 took off normally from Baku at 8 in the morning, local time. It was a routine flight that was supposed to last only 2 hours, but when the aircraft entered Russian airspace, something extraordinary happened. The passengers heard explosions. Strange metallic objects pierced the cabin. People started bleeding from wounds caused by shrapnel that went through the metal of the fuselage. But here's something even more disturbing. The aircraft's global positioning system was also jammed. And that's no coincidence. It's a military tactic often used during air defense operations. And then came the decision that exposed everything. Instead of directing the damaged plane to nearby Russian airports, Russian air traffic control ordered the crew to fly across the Caspian Sea to Kazakhstan. A journey of more than 400 kilometers with a severely damaged aircraft and failing hydraulic systems. And in those moments, the first question that comes to mind is, but why did they do that? Wouldn't it have been easier to land right there nearby? Look, the answer to that question is simple and shocking at the same time. Stop and think. If the plane had crashed into the sea during the journey, as was probably the intention, it would have been almost impossible to recover evidence. The wreckage would have ended up at the bottom of the Caspian Sea, and the truth would have sunk along with it. But the Azerbaijani pilots, through extraordinary skill and courage, managed to keep the plane in the air long enough to reach solid ground. And that's when Russia's attempt to cover up started to fall apart. The first Russian explanations were almost comical. They said the plane collided with a flock of birds. But aviation experts laughed at this version. Birds don't fly at the altitude where the initial damage occurred, and birds definitely don't create puncture patterns consistent with missile shrapnel. They later changed the story, possibly blaming bad weather. But the weather data did not confirm severe conditions in the area. The third attempt was the most revealing. They admitted that air defense systems were active in the region due to Ukrainian drone attacks. Putin finally called President Aliyev 3 days after the accident, not to admit guilt, but to apologize for the fact that the tragic incident occurred in Russian airspace. A carefully chosen strategy to avoid taking legal responsibility for what happened. But Aliyev wasn't interested in diplomatic games. He had evidence. Multiple holes in the fuselage, passengers injured by metal particles, testimonies from survivors who heard explosions. All evidence led to one conclusion. A Russian air defense missile, probably a Panzer system, had hit a civilian plane full of families returning home for Christmas. And then, Aliyev did something unthinkable. He made 3 non-negotiable demands to Russia. They would have to formally admit guilt, punish those responsible, and fully compensate the victims. Weren't those diplomatic suggestions? They were ultimatums. Russia's response was telling. Instead of cooperating, they chose to retaliate and make the situation even worse. And that's when the crisis turned into something much bigger than just a plane crash. A few months after the accident, something terrible happened in Yekaterinburg, Russia. Russian security forces carried out a violent operation in an area where Azerbaijani migrant workers lived. 2 brothers, Ziadim and Rusem Safarov, were arrested in connection with a homicide investigation. But what happened next shocked the world. The brothers died while they were in police custody. Russia claimed that one of the deaths was due to a heart attack. But the Azerbaijani authorities saw this as something very different. A sign, a demonstrative murder, a message to Baku that Russia could target Azerbaijani citizens within its own borders whenever it wanted. And Azerbaijan's response was unprecedented. The government summoned the Russian ambassador, canceled Russian cultural events, and launched a criminal investigation for torture and homicide. But the most surprising thing was yet to happen. On June 30th, Azerbaijani police raided the office of the Russian news agency Sputnik in Baku. They detained the editor-in-chief and the director, and then they discovered something alarming. The investigation showed that the office was being used as an operations center for the Russian Federal Security Service, the Federal Security Service. This turned a diplomatic dispute into an espionage confrontation. Azerbaijan had publicly exposed a Russian intelligence operation on its territory. It was as if they were making a declaration of information warfare. But Aliyev didn't stop there. He did something that no country had ever done since the Soviet era. He made it illegal for Azerbaijani citizens to fight for Russia or for the Wagner Group. Simultaneously, he legalized fighting for Ukraine. The message was very clear. And it was in this heated context that the most explosive Russian accusations appeared. The Russian state media began spreading a conspiracy theory that tried to directly connect Azerbaijan to the war in Ukraine. See what was broadcast on Russian television about Azerbaijan and the famous Operation Spiderweb, which cost Russia billions.
Our intelligence discovered that the special services of Azerbaijan, using their diasporas in Russia, helped the Ukrainian special services carry out the sabotage and terrorism Operation Web, which aimed to target the strategic aviation of the Russian aerospace forces. This was reported by the Telegram channel Notes of a Veteran. Citing its intelligence sources, the Azerbaijani diaspora helped with logistics and cargo transportation using its business opportunities and infrastructure, markets, and warehouses. That is why the Russian secret services are currently taking actions to neutralize the Azerbaijani diasporas, which, in the literal sense of the word, are residences of the Azerbaijani secret services working in close contact with the Ukrainians.
The Russian accusation was simple. The Azerbaijani community in Russia was said to have helped Ukraine carry out one of the most devastating attacks against Russian military facilities. Operation Spiderweb destroyed 117 drones, hit 5 strategic bomber bases, and caused damages estimated in the billions of dollars. But there was a problem with that theory. It was completely made up. Operation Spiderweb was a total humiliation for the Russian security services. Ukrainian drones managed to penetrate hundreds of kilometers into Russian territory and hit some of the country's most heavily guarded military assets. It was a catastrophic intelligence failure. But instead of admitting incompetence, Russia chose a more convenient narrative. Blame Azerbaijan. That served multiple purposes. First, it diverted attention from the Federal Security Service's failure. Second, it justified the repression of the Azerbaijani community that was already happening. Third, it sent a message to other post-Soviet countries. If you align yourselves with Ukraine, you will be labeled as terrorists. It was a classic psychological operation, except it didn't work. While Russia was inventing conspiracy theories, Azerbaijan was actually helping Ukraine. Not with secret sabotage operations, but with something much more powerful: open and consistent support. Since the beginning of the Russian invasion, Azerbaijan has sent more than $42 million in humanitarian and reconstruction aid to Ukraine. Medicines, food, vital electrical equipment to repair the power grid devastated by Russian attacks. More than 130 transformers, 70 generators, millions of meters of power cables. But it was the demining equipment that really irritated Putin. Azerbaijan, which has vast experience in demining after the Karabakh conflict, sent machines like the Revival P to help Ukraine clear newly liberated territories. For Russia, this crossed a red line. But what Russia doesn't seem to have really understood in this whole story is that the Azerbaijan of 2025 is not the same country as it was 3 years ago. Something fundamental had changed in the power dynamics of the region. And that something has a name: Nagorno-Karabakh. Nagorno-Karabakh is a mountainous region in the heart of Azerbaijan that has been occupied by Armenia since the 90s. For 3 decades, about 20% of Azerbaijani territory was under Armenian control, with more than 700,000 people displaced from their homes. And during all those years, Russia used this conflict as a way to control Azerbaijan, supplying weapons to both sides and maintaining a balance that gave it control over Baku's foreign policy. But in September 2023, the game changed, and Azerbaijan achieved something it had been seeking for 3 decades: the complete reconquest of Nagorno-Karabakh. In just 24 hours, Azerbaijani forces eliminated the separatist republic and reintegrated the territory. And most importantly, Russia, which maintained peacekeeping forces in the region, did nothing to stop it. And do you want to know why this victory was so important? Because for decades, the unresolved Karabakh conflict was Russia's main source of leverage over Azerbaijan. The Russians kept this conflict frozen and used it to control the foreign policy of both Armenia as well as Azerbaijan itself. But when Russia got bogged down in Ukraine, its ability to project power in the Caucasus region diminished dramatically. The Russian peacekeepers ended up becoming passive observers, and Aliyev realized he had a historic window of opportunity. As you can see, the reconquest of Karabakh was not just a military victory, it was a geopolitical liberation. For the first time since independence, Azerbaijan was free from the main issue that kept it dependent on Russia, and that changed everything. Now, Aliyev could do something that was considered unthinkable before September 2023, directly confront Russia without fear of retaliation. The conflict had been resolved on Azerbaijan's terms, not Russia's. And there was another crucial factor, an alliance with Turkey. Azerbaijan and Turkey are not just partners. They have a formal mutual defense agreement that obliges both countries to support each other using all available means in the event of a military attack. It's effectively a NATO security guarantee since Turkey is a member of the alliance. This means that any Russian military aggression against Azerbaijan could trigger a direct confrontation with NATO. It's a risk that Putin, already overwhelmed in Ukraine, simply can't take. But anyone who thinks that Azerbaijan was just protecting itself militarily is mistaken. He was also building an economic alternative that directly threatens Russian interests, the so-called Middle Corridor. This is a new trade route that connects China to Europe, passing through Central Asia, crossing the Caspian Sea, and continuing through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey. The most important thing is that this route completely bypasses Russian territory, breaking Russia's monopoly over trade between Asia and Europe. Azerbaijan is now positioning itself as the center of this new trade route, modernizing its ports and railways to handle much more cargo. Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, trade that used to pass through Russia has massively shifted to this Azerbaijani corridor due to the sanctions. For Putin, this is not just an economic loss, it's an existential threat. Azerbaijan is literally building the infrastructure to become completely independent from Russian influence forever. And now, Russia's options are becoming more and more limited. Putin is moving troops to the Azerbaijani border and reinforcing the Russian military base in Gyumri, Armenia. These are clear acts of intimidation. The truth is that Russia doesn't have the resources to open a second major front. Its army is degraded, overstretched, and completely focused on Ukraine. Starting a war with Azerbaijan would mean, in other words, confronting Turkey and, by extension, NATO itself. So Putin resorted to what he always does when he can't use military force. What they call hybrid pressure. They are persecuting the Azerbaijani community living in Russia, waging an information war, using economic coercion, and intimidating through their allies. But even that has its limits. Azerbaijan is Russia's third largest trading partner and a crucial corridor for Russian trade with Iran and the Middle East. Economic interdependence prevents a complete break. The result is a strange situation, a controlled hostility. Both countries know they can't make the situation worse, but they also can't go back to how things were before. And that brings us back to that devastating statement by President Aliyev. When he called the Russian explanations kindergarten stories, he wasn't just talking about a plane. He was publicly declaring that Azerbaijan no longer accepts being treated that way. It was a kind of geopolitical declaration of independence. And other countries are watching all of this. Armenia, feeling betrayed by Russia's inability to protect it in Karabakh, is also taking its own steps. For example, they have frozen their participation in the Russian-led military organization and are deepening ties with the European Union and the United States. In Kazakhstan, where the Azerbaijani plane crashed, the authorities allowed independent international investigations, signaling that they are not willing to cover up Russian actions on their territory. Even Georgia, historically cautious with Russia due to the occupied territories, is watching how Azerbaijan managed to confront Russia and come out relatively unscathed. What we are seeing is the gradual collapse of the Russian sphere of influence, not through revolution or war, but through the simple refusal of former allies to accept subordination. Putin built his power on the premise that post-Soviet countries had no choice but to accept Russian hegemony, that they could have formal independence, but not real independence. The case of Azerbaijan proves that this premise was wrong. Now, I want to know your opinion. Do you believe that the alliance between Ukraine and Azerbaijan can really change the balance of power in the region? Leave your answer in the comments. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video. See you next time. Subtitle by Adriana.